On Tech News today, Amazon and Hachette trade barbs and spam each other's CEOs. Plus, Facebook gets strong support in a fight over warrants. Xiaomi admits that its phone sent secret data back to China, and Chromebooks are selling well in at least one key market. All that and more coming up right now.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Monday, August 11th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by Personal Capital. With Personal Capital, you'll finally have all your financial life in one place and get a clear view of everything you own. Best of all, it's free. To sign up, go to personalcapital.com/TNT. And by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your used gadgets. Find out what your used Apple and Android devices are worth at gazelle.com. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mike Elgan. Back in the driver's seat is Jason Howell.
It's good to be back. I'm all rested.
Bigger than life.
A little bit of baggage under my eyes, but I need to unpack that later.
We'll run you down by the end of the week.
Excellent.
Don't you worry. And also, it's Monday, so that means Lindsey Turrentine is with us today as our co-anchor. Welcome, Lindsey.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Great.
As usual on a Monday morning. I love Monday morning.
That makes one of us. All right, well, let's jump into the Monday morning news then. A war of words between Amazon and Hachette continued over the weekend. We told you Friday about some 900 or so book authors who published an open letter in the New York Times Sunday slamming Amazon for the negotiating tactics with publishing giant Hachette. Amazon had withheld or delayed some books to pressure Hachette into agreeing to its terms for ebook pricing. That letter gave out Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos' personal email address and called on the public to spam Bezos with public pressure. But Saturday, Amazon preemptively slammed back by calling on Kindle authors to spam Hachette CEO Michael Peach and argue Amazon's case. And finally, Peach hit back by replying to all those emails with Hachette's side of the story. In related news, Amazon's applying the same tactics to negotiations with Walt Disney Company. Amazon is no longer accepting pre-orders for Disney DVD and Blu-ray titles like Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and Maleficent. Well, it's tragic news, Lindsey Turrentine, for those Captain America fans who wanted to pre-order. But it is a point of controversy because, of course, Amazon says that all of this is for the benefit of consumers, and in the case of the books, for readers and for literacy, because driving down the costs of literacy and books is good for everybody. What is your take on this whole case?
Well, for starters, it's one more example of truth being more interesting than fiction anyway. I mean, you sort of couldn't make up this back and forth that they're having. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about it is that authors are involved, and authors, especially big ones, are, they're good writers, they're good thinkers, and so you've got a lot of interesting people chiming in, and a lot of sort of, it is actually a war of words. That you're not just seeing this played out in pricing. It's actually very long letters, really well thought out from both sides, sniping at each other. I think that everybody's nervous about the future of publishing. I think that, maybe it's a little bit naive, but I think that everybody has sort of the best intentions. Hachette wants to be able to continue functioning as a publisher over time. They're probably under a lot of financial pressure. Amazon wants to be able to do the kind of trailblazing that it believes it's doing. And I think that eventually they'll sort this out, but it's going to be a little uncomfortable for a while. And I think that both sides are not doing a very good job keeping authors out of the mix, and authors don't really deserve to be penalized anywhere.
Well, we were talking about this, me and some followers on Google Plus were sort of hashing this out all weekend on, in comments and so on. And the issues here kind of get muddled. So just to separate and tease out the two separate issues that are going on here. One of them is Amazon's desire to force the publishing industry to offer books at much lower prices than it wants to offer them at, or possibly than it can offer them at. And the second issue is the negotiating tactic that Amazon is using. In general, I'm sensing a general approval of Amazon's desire to drive down the costs of ebooks down to just a few dollars. People seem to agree with Amazon's point that this boosts literacy. Ironically, Amazon talked about George Orwell and quoted George Orwell in some of this communication, and it turns out Orwell was actually in favor of more expensive books. If you look at some of his comments on that, he said that the more expensive books are, the more money people spend on literacy, and that's good for the industry, et cetera, et cetera. But the second point about the negotiating tactics is the part that worries a lot of people, and it worries me as well, because it demonstrates Amazon's willingness to use its leverage. You might not call it a monopoly, it might not even be a monopsony, but they have a lot of dominance in the book selling industry, obviously, especially in ebooks, and they're willing to use that power to sort of get their way in negotiations. That feels a bit like an abuse to me. Maybe that's just good, good business sense and really working hard on behalf of the consumers. But personally, it feels to me like evidence that Amazon's willing to use their power to get its way and to earn business and take business away from other companies, including partners.
Well, one of the things that I think really worries people about Amazon is that everybody knows that Amazon doesn't really behave like most large companies. It's really, it's out for the long game and for winning in a very sort of slow way, and is willing to not make a lot of money in the short term in order to dominate in the long term, which worries people a little bit. And Amazon knows that the average consumer is just never going to argue with low prices. And so they have a little bit of a trump card there. Like when they say, we just want to keep prices low, that's kind of hard to argue with. But what people don't realize is that as publishers get pressed for profits through this kind of low pricing, what goes by the wayside is things like editors, right? People to give a novel a second or third read and really comment and make sure that it's very high quality. And publicity. You know, we all know that authors get very little publicity help these days from their publishers. They essentially have to do it themselves. And some of that is probably the fault of Amazon and the fact that margins have become so slim, it's hard for those those important parts of the publishing process to continue.
Yeah, and to your point about Amazon being an unusual business, Sucharita Mulparu, who's a Forrester researcher, commented on this case and made the observation that most retailers aren't willing to hurt themselves by cutting off sales. This is a very unusual situation in any sort of negotiations in the publishing industry, because so far there hasn't been a company like Amazon willing to say, you know what, we're going to take business away from you. We're going to take business away from ourselves. We're going to go scorched earth on this thing until we get our way in these negotiations. And that's very, very unusual, because usually it's pretty painful financially for anybody, any sort of bookseller, whether it's retail or online, to take this kind of tactic. By the way, this is the New York Times ad that those 900 authors put in there. This is a $100,000 ad. There it is. On one side, you have the letter. On the other side, you have all the authors who are signing it virtually. That's kind of an interesting thing. Now, one of the subtleties of this, which that illuminates the contest here between two entirely separate business models for the same industry, Hachette is arguing that it needs to charge what it charges because it needs money for things like producing titles, including marketing. Now, one could argue that Amazon doesn't want Hachette to have money for marketing. You know what I mean? They don't want them to have any leftover money to compete against Amazon. And so really, it's really a slippery slope here between, it's a fine line, I guess is the right cliche, between Amazon decimating a competitor and driving down book prices and, essentially bringing into the 21st century an obsolete industry and using the internet's bias for friction-free capitalism to make books more accessible to more people. So it's a fine line, and we'll continue to watch this story. It's also interesting that negotiations like this between two companies used to be backdoor. You never heard about them. They never went out in the public. This is very public, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this. Everybody's going to take everything to the court of public opinion because that's really where these types of issues are going to be decided for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon, Amazon is just such an interesting business, and it's in everybody's lives. There are probably very few people in the United States anyway who haven't used Amazon or participated in it or don't rely on it in some way. So it's always going to get a lot of attention because everybody can relate.
Absolutely. Well, in just a minute, we're going to hear about Facebook getting a lot of support in the industry and from elsewhere over its contest with a government in New York. But first, I want to tell you about Personal Capital, one of our sponsors today. Personal Capital will help you get your financial life in order. And it does that in a number of ways. One of them is it helps you understand your own money. One of the reasons people get in trouble financially is they carry around delusions or misconceptions about what's happening with their money. They may think they have more money to spend than they actually have. They may think they have more savings, more in their accounts. They may think that their investments are doing better than they actually are. Personal Capital will bring all your different accounts into one place where you can get an intuitive sense of what's happening to your money, and in real time as well. Personal Capital brings all your accounts onto a single screen, and you could look at this screen with your computer, but also your phone or your tablet. Real-time intuitive graphs help you grasp exactly what's happening with your money. Now, we talk a lot on this show about Android Wear. Personal Capital is one of the first companies to support Android Wear. I've been using Personal Capital on my watch. It's actually saved me money. Within the first day of using it, it saved me money because it told me about an overage charge that was about to be implemented on one of my bank accounts, and I didn't get the notification from my bank. I may have gotten it somewhere in email. I don't know what happened to that email, but my wrist vibrated and I got the notification and I saved myself a fee. So right off the bat, I was saving money from this free account. So all you have to do to implement, if you have Android Wear, if you're going to have Android Wear sometime in the near future, all you have to do is download the Android app for Personal Capital, and then use the Android Wear app that comes with Android that you download to accompany Android to implement that and get Personal Capital on your wrist. Super convenient, super easy to do. The other thing Personal Capital does is it shows you how much you're overpaying in fees. It's giving you advice all the time because it analyzes where your money is, how you're managing your money, and it can see where you're spending money to manage your money that you don't need to spend, and it'll save you money there. So there's no need to wait. Signing up takes just a minute and it pays big dividends. Personal Capital gives you total clarity and transparency to make better investment decisions right away. To set up your free account, go to personalcapital.com/TNT, and remember that Personal Capital is free, and it's the smart way to grow your money. And we thank Personal Capital for their support of Tech News Today. So it looks like Facebook is getting some backup. Lindsey Turrentine.
Okay, so in 2013, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office obtained warrants to search 381 Facebook accounts that were owned by people who are suspected of fraud. Facebook fought that but lost, and now is receiving support from an amicus brief filed on Friday by the New York Civil Liberties Union. The brief is also supported by the ACLU, Google, Dropbox, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Twitter, Yelp, Foursquare, Kickstarter, Meetup, and Tumblr. All those companies are attempting to prevent these types of broad searches in the future. And here to discuss his reporting on the story is Reed Albergotti, reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Hi, Reed. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about this brief, what the gist of it is, and really what the purpose of an amicus brief is?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Facebook is appealing this decision by the judge to, both allow the search warrants, these very broad search warrants, and to, gag Facebook, not allow Facebook to warn its users that, they're about to be searched by prosecutors in New York. The brief really focuses on the fact that these warrants are so broad. They look at Facebook as this huge part of people's lives that touches many different corners of their, both professional and personal lives. Now, when police get a search warrant under normal circumstances, they search one house for a certain type of thing. They can't even search the entire house in many cases. And what they're saying is when you search Facebook, it's like searching someone's entire life. And they want to narrow that. And this is obviously technology creates these new areas of law that need to be discussed, and case law needs to be created. And I think that's what's happening here. Facebook wants to, push this forward and actually, allow the courts to, make some decisions here. And they're hoping that, these warrants have to be much more narrow. For instance, we want to search a person's Facebook messages between, two dates, and we just want access to their entire account.
Doesn't the benefits of Facebook, the fact that people put so much information on Facebook, enable law enforcement to crack down on crooks and arrest bad guys? Isn't that a good thing? And, why would Facebook care? I mean, what's the downside for Facebook?
Well, yeah, I think it's really important to draw a distinction here between this and something like, the Edward Snowden revelations, where you have, government searching all these files, phone records without any warrants. Here you have prosecutors going to a judge with evidence, the judge reviewing that and deciding to, search Facebook, to issue a warrant, and actually notifying Facebook of the warrant as well. So this is a totally different situation. But what it is, it's more akin to, a recent Supreme Court decision that said when police officers confiscate a cell phone, they actually need a search warrant to look at that phone, and specific parts of that phone. So, it's just the courts coming to grips with the fact there is so much information that electronically now that one phone or hard drive or Facebook account shouldn't be treated as if it's just one piece of evidence. It needs to be sliced and diced, and really defined by search warrants.
So can you, just for those of us who don't really know what an amicus brief is, can you sort of explain what an amicus brief is? And then will this document, this brief, be helpful? Does it actually have the potential to change a judge's mind in the future?
I mean, amicus briefs are friend of the court documents where, anyone can weigh in and basically give their opinion on how, a case should be decided. And, I think they are, I think they do guide the courts. And I think that the fact that, you have a lot of big tech companies here. I mean, there's obviously a public relations quotient to this. I mean, I think tech companies want to be seen, especially, post Snowden, as really pro-privacy, trying to protect the rights of their users. But it could also help the judge make the decision. Ultimately, I think, judges are going to go by what they view as the law. But again, these laws were decided long before, the internet even existed, and especially before social media and the mobile web, mobile app universe existed.
Reed, before we send you packing here, can you tell us about the book you wrote, Wheelmen, about Lance Armstrong, which I think is the most interesting sports story of the decade. But tell us just very briefly about your book.
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, I covered the whole Lance Armstrong doping saga for the Wall Street Journal for years with a colleague of mine, Vanessa O'Connell. And, at the end, when he was stripped of his titles and everything kind of came to a head, we looked at each other and we just thought, this is such a great book here. There's so much that we couldn't get into the newspaper. And it goes back in history, to the 1970s and the creation of American cycling. And, it was a really fun project. And the book is done. It just came out on paperback. It's done very well. We're on the New York Times bestseller list and in the top 10 actually for sports books right now, which is great. But it's funny you ask about that because you spent the whole first part of the show, talking about Amazon. And, as an author, I really hope that we can find a way to have the convenience of Amazon and the Kindle and all that, but still support authors to do projects like this, because I still remember how long, painful, and just all around exhausting the process of writing a book is. And, people are not going to go through that for free, for sure.
Writing a book is exhausting for sure. And I, got to wonder if steroids would help. But I guess we could read your book and find out. It's probably not a good idea. Reed Albergotti writes for the WSJ.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Reed Albergotti. Thank you so much again for joining us on Tech News Today, Reed.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Caffeine helps, but that's not a performance-enhancing drug.
I would
Sure
argue with that. Thanks again, Reed. Well, Finland's F-Secure last week verified an accusation made by some users of some Xiaomi smartphones that the phone was phoning home like ET and secretly sending data back to servers in China. Now the company has explained itself and issued a patch. Here to tell us all about it, Skyping in from Beijing, China, is Richard Lai, the editor-in-chief for the Chinese version of Engadget. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here now. Before we get started, what time is it there in Beijing?
It's 1:42 a.m. and I think the bed's waiting for me.
Yeah,
right
you're
behind me.
a trooper, and you're a trooper. And apologies to both you and the bed. We appreciate you hanging on. We're running a little late today, so we especially appreciate it. Now, what data were these phones sending back to China, and why were they doing it?
So this is part of Xiaomi's so-called cloud messaging service. So it's a bit like Apple's iMessage service or any other instant messaging services that uses your, say, phone number as your identifier. So what happened with the Xiaomi system is that the phones were kind of quietly sending its IMEI number, which is the device identifier, as well as its phone number back to Xiaomi servers in Beijing. Now, the problem is when people originally found out about Xiaomi's phones sending some sort of data back to Beijing, Xiaomi's response was that this should only happen if you had enabled Xiaomi's own cloud service, which is part of its Android system called MIUI or MIUI. But then later on, as you mentioned just now, F-Secure bought a brand new Redmi 1S, which is Xiaomi's budget phone, totally new. They didn't add any Google accounts or MIUI accounts into it, so it's meant to be totally clean. But then they managed to catch the phone still sending out those data I mentioned just now. So those two numbers, the IMEI number and the phone number. And another thing was, whenever the guys at F-Secure added new numbers to the address book, they also found out that the phone was also sending those phone numbers to the servers as well. And worse yet, they were not encrypted. So that was pretty much how F-Secure managed to sort of extract those data out very easily as well. So, but like you said just now, Xiaomi's already issued a patch that, well, first of all, encrypts the data right away. And secondly, it gives you the option to opt out of that cloud messaging service. So you finally, well, basically it's now an opt-in service so that the phone, even if it's brand new, doesn't automatically send those data back to Beijing. So yeah.
So Hugo Barra, executive at Xiaomi, has been very open about this, which I'm sure everybody appreciates. Which phones were sort of compromised by this problem, and how do users with those phones get the patch? What did he tell us about that?
I think it's pretty much any phone sold by Xiaomi, I think, especially if it's running on the version that supports cloud messaging. I think that's been the case for some time. It's just that it wasn't found out until recently. And obviously this kind of, all these small details start to appear when a brand becomes very big. And I think according to the research firm called Canalys, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Xiaomi has recently just, in Q2 of this year, it became the top-selling smartphone in China. I mean, I tend not to take these figures, so seriously, or you can never tell if these numbers are totally reliable, but it says something, So, and obviously, when a name suddenly becomes big, then some people, like either the users or even the competitors, start digging up some dirt and make the big guys look bad. And I guess that's pretty much what happened with Xiaomi. That's actually caused quite a backlash in Hong Kong and Taiwan because, there's a bit of a, let's just say a political tension over there recently between those two regions and mainland China. So I guess they become even more sensitive with this kind of issue.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. Richard Lai writes at Engadget.com. You can follow him on Twitter. Richard Lai, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Beijing, and go to bed and get some sleep, would you?
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much. Now, Lindsey, Turrentine, Chromebooks aren't killing it in the world of laptops compared to PCs, but they're doing really, really well in at least one market, aren't they?
Yes. So according to The Guardian, 5.2 million Chromebooks, I left a number out, have been sold this year, and a large chunk of those have been used in the U.S. education market, which is creating some challenges for Apple and for the traditional PC market, where the iPad and other PCs have traditionally been successful. And I will add that my children's school district in Berkeley, California, went to Chromebooks last year, and it's a huge district, so that's a huge investment. Here to talk a little bit about this and about his story is Charles Arthur, the technology editor at The Guardian. So welcome, Charles.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening here? Is there really a tidal shift going on here in the technology that American classrooms are using? Is this a really big deal for the American classroom, or is it sort of an incremental change?
It's a shift in the way that people think about how they should be using computers. So for years, the question of whether you use computers in the classroom was an open one, and educators thought about that for a long time. Then Windows came along. Windows computers were very popular. Apple had a good sort of space in the education space with some of its cheaper computers. Then you had the iPad came along, and a lot of school districts, certainly in the US, looked at iPads, and certainly here in the UK, we've got a number of schools which have taken up iPads. And then you have Chromebooks coming along, and they're all jostling for position in terms of which is the best device to use for education. And this has been quite a big debate. I mean, you only have to go on to a search engine and search for the question of Chromebooks versus iPads in education, and you'll find teachers and administrators all arguing about which is the best and which is the most appropriate for different age levels. So what this report from Gartner is suggesting is that although the number of Chromebooks being sold isn't very big, so 5.2 million this year, that compares to about more than 300 million PCs being sold worldwide. The fact is still that they're starting to get an interesting toehold in this niche, so that they're in effect displacing iPads, probably displacing certainly Windows computers, and starting to get a space for themselves where they could actually drive down the cost of admin, drive down the cost of installation, and where they're also proof against viruses and kids trying to hack them.
The elephant in the living room, of course, is budgeting and budget cuts, which happen all the time and cyclically, and also along with the economy as well. And of course, that's where Chromebooks can really come in handy for a number of reasons. They're, of course, very inexpensive to buy outright. And then a lot of the content is in the cloud, so that tends to be cheaper in general than app-based content as the kind you're more likely to have with iPads. And I'm reading a lot of stories where school districts jumped very quickly into iPads thinking that was a big solution to their problem to get away from PCs, fewer viruses, all that kind of thing, less maintenance, less training, and so on. But I'm hearing that schools are starting to abandon iPads and moving toward Chromebooks and other cloud-based solutions. Do you think this trend will sort of pick up? Is the iPad, in other words, less than good solution for schools?
I haven't seen enough data really to be sure about that, and I'd really like to see a lot more information about whether schools are abandoning things or whether they're just rethinking things during a contract, or whether they are actually chucking stuff out the back, because it would be a pretty radical decision to buy a whole lot of iPads and having bought them and installed them, then to say, you know what, that was a bad idea, let's put Chromebooks in instead. I suspect that actually what you're seeing is that when you come to a technology refresh cycle, that a lot of schools and school districts and so on are considering what their best options are. And it's entirely feasible that they basically replace a Windows PC with a Chromebook, because in many ways it's the same sort of form factor, the same sort of things. Possibly other schools are questioning whether that's the right way to go about it. And the question of what is the best way to teach, what is the best way to learn, what are the best form factors to learn on, these are all things that I think educators are better qualified to think about.
I think that there's a little bit of preference for the keyboard coming in here. I mean, input to an iPad is very different, and certainly you can use a keypad, but it's not readily available and it costs more money. And I think that potentially the ease of sharing with Google Docs on a Chromebook, even though you can access Google Docs anywhere, I think what's happening is that administrators are setting these up to make it very, very simple so that a student who's working on a paper has easy access to the teacher, to collaboration tools, and teachers. There's sort of there's less hand-wringing about turning in your work because it's just there in sort of a classroom Google Docs setup. That seems to be one of the advantages. Is that your impression also, Charles, or do you think that it may just come down to money?
I think that what you're describing there is a classic school sort of workflow, but it's the sort of thing that in the UK we call the secondary school. I think in the US it's a high school sort of thing. It's what grade 7, grade 8 and onwards. When your children are sort of 13 or so. But for primary school children, do they know how to use a keyboard? Is that the best way for them to learn about things? Possibly iPads are better suited for children who are, learning at the very first stages, and Chromebooks are better for children who are in high school, secondary education. Again, I'm not an expert in this field at all, but I suspect there might be a difference there. I mean, I know I have a child who's just completed primary school, and the head teacher there has moved them over to iPads for a lot of what they're doing. And when a prospective parent came in, they wanted to see the computer room. They wanted to see the room with the places where they have devices that have keyboards. And they sort of don't think iPads are real computers. And there's a certain amount of that sort of attitude that parents have a sort of view of what is proper computing and what is, not proper computing, and it's not related to what is the best way for a child to learn.
One of the benefits, of course, is that teachers oftentimes like to send the kids home with the device. And if you send kids home with an iPad, they're likely to get mugged on their way home from school, whereas nobody wants to steal a Chromebook, especially the cheaper ones, maybe a Chromebook Pixel. So that's yet another consideration. Charles Arthur, it's nearly 7 p.m. in the UK where you are, and I really appreciate you hanging in there, running late today. And I really thank you for sticking it out.
That's okay. I mean, I could have contributed on the Amazon thing as well, because I'm an author. My wife is an author, and I see a lot of what goes on in terms of Amazon. I mean, just to sort of circle back to that as a story, because it is so interesting. It seems to me Amazon wants to be the monopoly supplier. It also wants to be the monopsony buyer for everything. But the question is, if it has a monopoly on ebooks, then what happens to all the sales that go through ebooks? Are those lost sales to print, or is it actually an expanded market? And I suspect that the reality is that the market stays about the same, but all the benefits accrue to Amazon.
I appreciate that perspective, and we'd like to have you on next time we do an Amazon story. We'll give you a shout, and hopefully you'll be available. And so on. Charles Arthur writes for TheGuardian.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Charles Arthur. Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you.
All right. Well, in just a sec, we're going to tell you about a sad, sad website. But first, I want to tell you about a happy place called Gazelle. It's happy because they're going to buy your used gadgets. You've got a bunch of stuff lying around the house that is worth a lot of money, and it's losing value all the time. That's why you need to sell it to Gazelle. If you're thinking about buying the upcoming iPhone 6, you want to buy an HTC One or an iPad or a Moto X, you're feeling kind of guilty because these things are expensive. You shouldn't feel guilty. You get the old stuff you're not using back into circulation, get some money back, which you can use to fund your next purchase. Just go to gazelle.com. That's GAZELLE.com and check it out. Here's how you do it. You just go in there, find the device you'd like to sell to them. You indicate the condition roughly, broke, good, flawless, whatever, and they'll give you a price. That price is locked in for 30 days. Even if the value of that device goes down, you'll still have that price honored. And that's why you want to go right now, especially if you are going to be selling an old iPhone. When the new iPhone comes out, possibly next month, the value of current iPhones on the market and older iPhones will probably go down. And so you want to lock in prices all the time on your gadgets if you're even thinking about selling them to Gazelle. You get paid in cash. Payment is fast. You get it within a few days. And you can get paid by check, PayPal, or if you use the Amazon gift card option, you get an extra 5%. That's the one that I always use. And Gazelle is trustworthy. They've paid more than $100 million to way more than 700,000 customers, and shipping is free. Most items qualify for a free box. Look at that, an iPad Air, $380. You know, that is real money. That'll get you one of these Chromebooks, or it'll even get you most of the way toward a brand new iPad. So find out what your Apple or Android device is worth. Take a minute and go to Gazelle.com to find out. And do it now, because your device may lose value the longer you wait. A new website called Sad Tweets, built by agency Party New York, finds your saddest tweets, the ones that got no engagement and that everybody ignored, and then it shows them in a sad slideshow. The slideshow is accompanied by sad piano music, and it's just really a sad thing. Sadly, it shows only your sad tweets and not other people's sad tweets. So you just go to the site, click it, it'll find the sad ones and show them to you. It's very depressing. Lindsey,
I haven't done it. I have not done it. I can't bring myself to do it. I don't want to see the sad tweets.
Before you do it, get a couple of hankies. It's a tragic affair, I tell you.
I've seen a couple of people bragging on Twitter that they have no sad tweets.
This is
which
Jason's,
I simply do not believe.
These are Jason's sad tweets. 2 months without RT or favorite.
Some of these are just kind of out of context. So, so that's kind of sad.
That's a pretty sad excuse, Jason.
Oh.
I had a whole lot of sad tweets. It was quite heartbreaking.
Well, see, about to break bad for the last time.
That is a sad tweet.
I'm surprised that didn't get any. See, and speaking of
that
context,
looks like a perfectly legitimate tweet. I don't know why that was so sad. Well, that is the tech news today. Our TNT fan of the day is Ian Rumbles in Massillon, Ohio, who posted these pictures on Google Plus of his setup. If you go down there and you can see, wow, that's a lot of computers. That looks like something you'd see around here in the brick house. He's got computers everywhere. He's got the IRC
and
going.
actual file folders back there. I like that. It's a retro look.
Yep, old school. So if you, tell us how you watch or listen to TNT. Just take a picture of your setup and post it on Google+, Twitter, or Facebook using the hashtag HowDoYouWatchTNT, and we will find it. Lindsey Turrentine, thank you so much for joining us today and every Monday. What have you been working on these days? Where can people read your stuff?
People can come to cnet.com always, and they can read my stuff when I get a chance to write it, and the stuff of the good people who work at CNET. We've been busy gearing up for fall. It's going to be a big fall, and we're really excited. So come check it out.
All right, wonderful. You can subscribe to Tech News Today on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo, RSS. So many options. You can choose your favorite way to subscribe at twit.tv/TNT. And follow us on Twitter. Tech News Today TV is our Twitter name. Join us on Google+. In our community, just search Google+ for Tech News Today. You'll find our community and also several pages related to Tech News Today. Please send us your thoughts and opinions. Send email to tnt@twit.tv or leave voicemail at 260-TNT-SHOW. And don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name's Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.